In the quiet hours before dawn, when the city still breathed in fragments of forgotten dreams, Arav sat alone on the edge of his bed, holding a letter he had never intended to read again. The paper was creased, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were still sharp enough to reopen wounds he had spent years pretending did not exist. It was Mira's handwriting, soft, familiar, and painfully alive. Outside, rain traced slow paths down the window, mirroring the way memories slid back into his heart without permission. He had loved her once with a devotion that made the world feel simple, and he had lost her through mistakes that felt unforgivable. People often said time healed everything, but time had only taught him how to survive with the ache, not how to erase it. As he read the letter again, every sentence pulled him backward into moments of laughter, arguments, silences, and promises broken too late to be saved. Years ago, Arav and Mira had been inseparable, bound together by shared struggles and small joys that felt monumental in their youth. They met when life was still uncertain, when dreams were fragile and love felt like a promise strong enough to conquer fear. Mira believed in kindness the way some people believed in destiny, quietly, stubbornly, without expecting rewards. Arav loved her for that, yet he also feared it, because her faith in goodness reflected everything he doubted about himself. When responsibilities grew heavier and misunderstandings piled up, he chose pride over patience and silence over honesty. Each unspoken word became a crack in what they had built. By the time he realized how deeply he was hurting her, she had already learned how to smile through pain, and that was the moment he truly began to lose her. The night Mira left was painfully ordinary, which made it unforgettable. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting, only a tired calm that frightened Arav more than anger ever could. She packed her bag slowly, pausing as if waiting for him to stop her, to say something that would change everything. But Arav stood frozen, convinced that love should not require him to bend or admit his faults. When the door finally closed behind her, the sound echoed like a verdict he could not appeal. In the days that followed, he told himself she would return, that love always found its way back. Instead, weeks turned into months, and the silence grew heavy with regret. That was when he learned that losing someone was not a single moment, it was a process, unfolding again and again in small, unbearable realizations. Mira, meanwhile, rebuilt her life quietly. She moved to a small town where no one knew her story and began working at a community center that supported struggling families. Every day, she poured her pain into helping others, believing that kindness could transform suffering into purpose. She still thought of Arav, especially on nights when loneliness crept in, but she refused to let bitterness take root in her heart. Forgiveness, she believed, was not about excusing someone's mistakes, it was about freeing oneself from the weight of resentment. Though her heart carried scars, she continued to love the world gently, hoping that one day, the love she gave would return to her in a different form. Back in the city, Arav's life moved forward in appearance only. He found success, earned respect, and filled his days with work, yet something essential remained missing. He avoided places that reminded him of Mira, but memories followed him relentlessly, appearing in empty cafes, familiar songs, and passing smiles that resembled hers for just a second too long. Over time, guilt softened into understanding, and understanding turned into a quiet desire for redemption. When he finally learned where Mira was, years later, it was not curiosity that drove him to her town, it was the hope that forgiveness, even if it came too late, might still be possible. The journey to Mira's town felt longer than it should have, every mile giving Arav more time to doubt himself. He questioned whether reopening the past was an act of courage or cruelty, whether his presence would heal old wounds or deepen them. When he finally arrived, the town greeted him with unfamiliar calm, narrow streets, modest homes, and a pace of life that felt kinder than the one he had left behind. He watched people greet each other by name, noticed the absence of hurry in their steps, and wondered if this gentleness was what Mira had been searching for all along. Standing outside the community center where she worked, his heart pounded not with hope, but with fear, the fear of seeing in her eyes the pain he had caused and knowing that apologies sometimes arrive long after they are needed. Mira noticed him before he spoke. Years had passed, but some presences leave a permanent imprint on the soul. For a brief moment, time folded in on itself, and she saw the man she once loved standing awkwardly in front of her, older, quieter, and visibly humbled. Arav struggled to find words, but Mira's silence said everything: surprise, caution, and a carefully guarded strength. When he finally apologized, it was not dramatic or rehearsed. It was raw, imperfect, and heavy with regret. He admitted his mistakes without defending them, confessed how losing her had reshaped him, and acknowledged that forgiveness was not something he deserved, only something he hoped for. Mira listened without interruption, her heart trembling between old pain and new understanding. Forgiveness did not come instantly. Mira asked him to leave, not out of anger, but out of honesty. She needed time to confront emotions she had buried under years of service and kindness. That night, she sat alone, questioning whether reopening her heart was worth the risk of being hurt again. She remembered the nights she had cried silently, the loneliness she had endured, and the strength it had taken to heal without closure. Yet she also remembered the love they once shared, the kind that had felt real, imperfect, and deeply human. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about forgetting the pain, it was about deciding whether that pain would control her future. Days passed, and Arif stayed in town, volunteering quietly at the community center, never pushing for another conversation. Mira observed him from a distance, noticing how he helped without seeking recognition, how he listened more than he spoke, how humility had softened him. The man before her was not the same one who had once let pride destroy their love. Slowly, her guarded heart began to loosen. One evening, as they shared tea after a long day of work, conversation flowed gently, cautiously, like a river finding its way back after a drought. They spoke of lost years, lessons learned, and the people they had become. For the first time, the past no longer felt like an open wound, but a scar, still visible, yet no longer bleeding. As weeks turned into quiet moments of shared understanding, Mira faced a truth she could no longer ignore: love had not disappeared, it had evolved. It was no longer reckless or dependent, but thoughtful and grounded in mutual growth. She forgave Arav, not because he had earned it through words or actions alone, but because holding on to resentment would deny the kindness she believed defined her. Forgiveness lifted a weight neither of them realized they still carried. Though the future remained uncertain, something fragile and beautiful began to form between them, not a return to what once was, but the possibility of something stronger, shaped by pain, patience, and grace. The true test of forgiveness arrived quietly, not as a grand moment, but as a choice made in silence. Arav was offered a position back in the city, one that promised stability, recognition, and everything he once believed defined success. When he told Mira, he made no request and placed no expectations on her. He had learned that love could not be demanded, it could only be offered honestly. Mira listened, feeling the familiar fear of loss rise again, yet this time she did not retreat. Instead, she recognized the difference between abandonment and honesty. For the first time, she saw a man willing to choose integrity over convenience, connection over control. They spent their final evening walking beneath a sky scattered with stars, speaking about the future with cautious hope. Mira confessed her fear of trusting again, and Arav admitted his fear of repeating old patterns. Rather than promises, they exchanged truths. Love, they realized, was not about guarantees, but about showing up even when certainty was impossible. When the night ended, Mira did something she never expected: she asked Arav to stay. Not because she needed him, but because she wanted to build something meaningful together, step by step. In that moment, their past no longer held power over them, it became a teacher instead of a prison. Arav declined the city offer and chose a simpler life, one grounded in service and shared purpose. Together, they expanded the community center, turning it into a place of healing for those broken by loss, poverty, and regret. Their love did not erase pain, but it transformed it into compassion. People who visited the center often noticed the quiet understanding between them, the way they communicated without words, the patience in their gestures, the kindness that guided their choices. Their story became a reminder that second chances are not about rewriting history, but about writing the future with wisdom earned through suffering. Years later, when asked about their journey, Mira would say that forgiveness was the bravest act of her life. Arav would add that being forgiven taught him responsibility more than punishment ever could. They had learned that love grows not from perfection, but from accountability, empathy, and the courage to change. Their story was not extraordinary because it was free of pain, but because it proved that pain could become purpose. In a world quick to abandon what is broken, they chose to mend, to believe that hearts, like people, are capable of renewal. On a quiet morning much like the one that began Arav's journey, he stood beside Mira watching sunlight fill the community center they had built together. The past no longer haunted them, it strengthened them. Their love was no longer a fragile dream, but a steady flame fueled by kindness and forgiveness. And in that stillness, they understood a simple truth meant for anyone who had ever lost and hoped again: sometimes the most heartbreaking endings are only the beginning of the most meaningful stories.